Last Saturday, yet more evidence that the transgender movement has become dangerous. And not just dangerous to vulnerable children, of course, who almost get pushed into mutilating themselves to supposedly change their gender. It's also become dangerous to people who dare to criticise it. Now let me show you one of the official speakers of the Trans Pride March in London on Saturday, a march that was endorsed by the London Mayor. This is that speaker, Sarah Jane Baker, born male, now identifies as female. Happens to be someone who spent 30 years in jail for armed robbery, kidnap, torture and attempted murder. Now, why this particular person was invited to speak at the Trans Pride event, well, that's a total mystery to me. But this is what that person said on Saturday, and listen to the cheers of the mob. They loved what they were hearing, a call to punch in the face any woman who was a feminist arguing for women-only spaces in sports without people born male.
I was going to come here and be really fluffy and be really nice and say, yeah, be really lovely and queer and gay. No, if you see a TERF, punch him in the face.
Those cheers at the end just get me, you know. Punching women in the face and they cheer. Now, worse than even that, the organisers of that Trans Pride March, which was backed by the London Mayor, actually defended what you just heard. They defended this violent criminal telling trans activists to punch women in the face. A spokesman said, Sarah and many others in our community hold a lot of rage and anger, and they have the right to express that anger through their words. And London's Mayor also wouldn't criticise the speaker personally. Now, I think the transgender movement, it's not just in Britain, it's got a huge problem here. I mean, they talk a lot about safety, you know, getting the pronouns right and all that kind of thing. Got to do it for the safety of the transgender community. But here we have a movement that sometimes platforms people, often people born male, who then threaten women, even attack them in ways that you'd never forgive if they still call themselves men. Now, it's not just the hypocrisy here that the transgender movement, you know, talks a lot about safety, but some activists now are making life very unsafe for their critics. It's this licensing of violence, this culture of violence. And how many journalists and activists too, this worries me, even politicians, they don't call it out. It's like they think it's normal or embarrassing to mention. But I don't know, maybe they think it's good. Now, I should say this is not just a problem with trans activists. We're also seeing this from some race activists and some climate activists, causes where apparently, well, it gives you a license to bully people. And it goes to a wider problem too. You know, we're losing the ability to disagree with civility. You know, disagree without wanting to hurt people or threaten them, humiliate them, cost them their job, their position, their reputation. And I agree, we should all want vulnerable trans people kept safe. I'm totally aboard with that. And in fact, I've thought that some of the pile-on professional exhibitionist Dylan Mulvaney, again transgender, has been over the top, quite nasty at times. But what I haven't heard from prominent TERFs, now these are women attacked for being trans exclusionary radical feminists, TERFs, it's meant as a term of abuse. I haven't heard TERFs, prominent TERFs, making similar calls for physical attacks on transgender people they don't agree with. You know, like, punch them in the face. But boy, have I seen the opposite. Harry Potter author J.K. Rowling, for instance, she's one of these feminists, these so-called TERFs, and she's had terrible threats made against her, including by this American transgender author, Gretchen Felker Martin, born male, who tweeted attacks on Rowling and other TERFs and sighed, if only they all had one throat, man. Which to me and a lot of other people reads like a wish to cut Rowling's throat. Now, we're not just talking here about threats and menaces from fringe players, lone nutters, always, you know, every cause is nutters on the fringe. I got all that. No, no, no. We're hearing it, like I said, from people who are invited speakers at rallies. We're hearing it from And we're not getting it condemned either. And I'll give you an example. Melbourne, Australia. Another of these alleged TERFs. Another of these feminists wanting safe spaces for women born female is this academic, Holly Lawford-Smith from Melbourne University, who has, as a consequence, had a campaign of harassment for years from fellow academics and radical students trying to shut her up or get her kicked out of the university. Now, this campaign has included anonymous people now, presumably students, plastering the university with posters implying Lawford-Smith is a fascist and telling her students to pick a side in that battle. Windows have even been smashed. And now Lawford-Smith's university, this is a university, is considering posting security guards outside her lectures. Where are the trans movement leaders calling this out? You know, this is not what we stand for. We want safety for everyone, not just for us and danger for you. Instead, in fact, we now get one of Lawford-Smith's fellow academics, a trans activist, effectively stoking the rage, the fury, the fire, by now announcing that she is writing a paper on the crossover between fascism, anti-trans feminism, and climate inaction, as if all these things are linked, you know. If you want women-only spaces without people born male because you're not comfortable with that, you're, of course, now a fascist. Seriously? A Nazi even. And we know what some people think should be done with Nazis. And this insane hate speech does have consequences, physical consequences. They were felt earlier this year by Kelly J. Keane-Minshall, a British feminist, also called a TERF by the trans lobby, a woman fighting to save women's spaces, women's sports, women's identity from the transgender movement. Just saying, look, women born women are different and, you know, we need our own space. But when she held a speaking tour of Australia, she and her supporters were monstered by trans activists in Tasmania. I found it quite threatening, and so did the audience. Had a microphone stolen at a Melbourne rally, and had an Australian senator, Lydia Thorpe, brawling with security guards when the senator tried to physically stop Keane-Minshall speaking in Canberra. Now, most of the Australian media seemed to actually cheer on this intimidation of a woman, certainly didn't find something in it worth condemning, you know, as they would if a man had done that in some other cause. And then, not surprisingly perhaps, in New Zealand, these protests against Keane-Minshall turned violent. One trans person, again born male, is there a coincidence here, attacked Keane-Minshall with tomato sauce when she was about to speak. And then a mob, again, many of them men, tore down barricades to get to her, throwing eggs and liquids at her, getting right in her face and threatening violence, wrestling with the women trying to save her. Well, you probably won't find it surprising, given all this, that one drag queen, again born male, even elbowed an elderly Keane-Minshall supporter in the head. And another trans activist there, a man, allegedly, I should say, this court proceedings, punched another woman in the head, an elderly woman in the head. And once again, I got to ask, I mean, this is so shocking. A man punching an elderly woman aged above 70 in the head. Where were the transgender leaders saying this violence, this is not us, this is not our cause, this doesn't represent us? Where is this movement going? To me, it seems too often a license for bullies. I mean, leave aside the argument about whether the transgender movement is betraying children. I can see arguments on both sides. I mean, I've got my own real worries here. Leave that aside. I'm just talking about how we disagree. Where this movement is going, I don't know. It seems to be a license for bullying, particularly by the left, and for preaching the most amazing hatred. And what next, I ask? Well, in March, One transgender person, this time born female, named Audrey Hale, took an automatic weapon to her old school and murdered 3 children and 3 staff. Police then shot her dead. She left behind a manifesto, which is still kept secret by police. Perhaps, it seems the families don't want the manifesto made public. I can understand perhaps why. But it would be interesting, wouldn't it, to know from that manifesto how Audrey Hale justified these horrific murders. What made her think this was excused? Now, like I said, the trans movement is a real problem here. Too many activists, often people born male, are bullying women, even attacking them, spreading fear. And too often this is treated as normal and understandable that they have this hate. And if we don't push back on this brutality, it's not just we leave the door open to even more violence. It really is a sign that we are a civilization in decay.